Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Lovely Planet for PC, Mac, Linux, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Wii U. This is a first-person shooter, although it's more of a first-person platformer shooter, which is kind of odd to say, but regardless, it was developed by Quick Tequila and published by Tiny Build in 2014 for PC, Mac, and Linux, and it saw release on Xbox One, PS4, and Wii U this year. And it was generally very well received. Most people seem to think it's a great time, and most people reviewed it pretty highly. But the real question here is, how does it actually stack up? Because this is ultimately a very simple concept with a fairly unique art style. So the question ultimately becomes, is that simplicity a strength or is it really a detriment? Let's delve into this thing and find out. Well, as far as presentation goes, it's what I would describe as minimalist. They have opted for an art style that is lots of flat colors, and even though it is a 3D game, you end up having this very nice 2D aesthetic that is very bright, very colorful, and rather cutesy. And if you're a fan of Katamari Damacy, this is going to look pretty much right at home for you. But for everybody else, it is definitely a rather out there art style that is going to be really hit or miss for you. Either you're going to like it or you're not going to like it. There is no in between with this. But hey, it's just nice to have something that's bright and colorful and pretty wacky when you get down to it. I mean, Japanese characters pop up all over the place, and generally speaking, it's just kind of silly. Because to accompany the rather odd visuals, you end up with a soundtrack that is very catchy and extremely upbeat, as well as some sound effects that are fairly silly and do a lot to add to this kind of ridiculous art style that they've gone with. But of course, if you're expecting me to talk about voice acting, there isn't any. So about the most I can say there is that I feel like voice acting would actually be a detriment to this game rather than a benefit, just because it is so upbeat and cartoony and silly, and there's not really any situation where voice acting would actually be handy. But of course what really matters here is the gameplay, because there is no story. It's just a bunch of levels that you go through and you complete various challenges on. And this is done through a combination of running, jumping, and shooting, and there's nothing else to this game at all. You only have the one gun, and it only shoots a projectile that actually does have a travel time, so you do need to compensate for that. And you can jump pretty high, so it's pretty easy to get over obstacles or get from platform to platform as you need to. And your objective for every single level is to shoot all of the red guys and make it to the end of the level. Sounds easy, right? Well, that's where things get a bit more interesting because they designed this game more around speed running than anything else. You may be wondering what I mean by that. Well, just take a look at the game. Every single time you go through a level, when you get to the end of a level, it will pop up with an assessment of the amount of time you took to actually be able to get through the level. And that displays next to a leaderboard that shows you the best times for that particular level. And so you know right off the bat that the game is designed entirely around speedrunning. You are quite simply trying to get the fastest time available. Now, there are problems with this. First problem is that the game is based entirely around trial and error. While the enemies do die in one hit, you die in one hit as well, and so when you get to later levels especially, they make things more difficult by just throwing more stuff at you and requiring more and more precision out of you. Now, theoretically that's a good idea, but there's no crosshair, so it's actually a massive pain to be able to actually aim in this game. Which of course wouldn't be a problem if your weapon was hit scan, but unfortunately you're shooting projectiles, so you actually do need an indication of where your projectile is going to go. Especially since in the later levels you need to make some very, very precise shots very, very quickly. Sure, you'll pretty much get it down after a bunch of tries, but that's the problem. They throw a bunch of stuff at you that you just could not have seen coming unless you had actually failed miserably on that level beforehand. You just keep trying the level over and over and over again until eventually you manage to get through it. This means that if a level is particularly poorly designed, it becomes extremely frustrating. Namely, once you get to the really late parts of the game and they start throwing a fog in there so you can't see what you're doing. This means that on top of having to jump from platform to platform, many of which will start to disappear right after you land on them, and in addition to having to dodge projectiles or outright shoot them, because in the case of homing projectiles, you actually have to shoot the projectile to get it to stop coming at you, and on top of having to shoot every single enemy in the level in order to be able to progress, as well as the fact that you'll have to be avoiding environmental obstacles, means that this can actually become an extremely frustrating process, particularly once you hit the fog levels where it's just plain old BS. I mean, in a game about trying to get the best time you can with a bunch of really precise shots, throwing in a bunch of fog that makes it basically impossible to see what you're doing is just a terrible idea. It means that you'll be restarting those levels over and over and over again because you couldn't dodge projectiles, because you couldn't see them coming. It is immensely frustrating, and it does highlight the biggest problem this game has. It is for a very specific type of gamer. It's really designed for the kind of people who really enjoy something like Super Meat Boy or I Wanna Be the Guy. Games that are based around a rather small set of abilities and requiring you to just go through a massive amount of trial and error to be able to progress. For some people, that means this game is going to be fantastic. For others, it just means that it's going to be incredibly frustrating or downright boring. And I'm somewhere in the middle, because for the first several levels at least for the first couple of areas, I was actually having fun with it. And then it started to get more and more difficult, and the more difficult it got, the more I realized the difficulty was not about actual difficulty, but simply trial and error of finding out where the hazards are just by losing several times. And that's not fun. It's just frustrating, which is ultimately the deciding factor more so than the fact that the game is actually extremely short when you get down to it. For the sake of argument, let's assume that you're an extremely good player and you manage to get through all of the levels without really any problems. You're looking at maybe an hour or an hour and a half of gameplay. There's really not much to this game at all, and the meat of it is going to come from simply replaying the levels over and over and over again until you manage to finally get them right. And while things start out incredibly easy as the game's trying to teach you the ropes, once you get past that, you find that the game is roughly the equivalent of being shoved out of a plane while you're going skydiving and not being told how your parachute functions. Sure, you'll figure it out eventually, but not without a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, and that's pretty much what happens with Lovely Planet. It's not really something I'd outright call a bad game, because the first half or so of it is actually fairly well designed. It's just when you get to the later half of it that things really start to spiral out of control, and that's where it really loses steam really quickly, which ultimately means that it's an extremely disappointing game. And because of that, I'm giving this a somewhat conditional 2.5 out of 5. If this style of play is your kind of thing, then you will definitely be able to get quite a bit out of Lovely Planet. But if it's not your kind of thing, then past roughly area 3 or so, because there's 5 areas in the game, each with a bunch of different levels in them, you'll find that things start to spiral out of control pretty quickly, and it becomes quickly frustrating. Having a game based around difficulty for difficulty's sake tends to do that. Thanks for watching.